TOA community, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Robert Linkul, trainingtheolderadult.com. And I wanted to talk to you today about an email that I just got from one of our TOA community members. And I'm going to read this to you, and then we're going to discuss regarding the belt squat. Okay, first she starts off by saying thank you for making the video on the Turkish get-up. She liked it, and I'm glad you liked it. And then we go into, can I make a comment or a question regarding the Instagram post that you put up where you're wearing a belt and weights are hanging off of them while you're doing squats. I think it has the title, Time Under Tension under it. And then there's a comment that says, hate that. So time under tension isn't a negative thing. I'm actually going to show you a video of that. It's just another terminology that suggests that you're going much slower in that lift to get the eccentric value of it. So you are technically increasing greater time under tension. It's another terminology for an eccentric style of lift, which I'll show you just a regular belt squat, and then I'll show you a time under tension eccentric focused belt squat. So I think some terms like that are utilized or seen in some eyes as like it's a macho thing or something like that. It isn't. That it's literally a different tempo that we're training for. It makes me concerned about the pull/stress on the spine. Makes me crazy to see those folks doing pull-ups in the gym with those belts on too. I think it's better to have the weight more evenly distributed and tight around the body if you are just trying to increase resistance. She suggests having like heavy clothing or chainmail, basically like a vest or heavy vest you put around your body when you're doing that. And have thought about that for years. Anyway, I'm surprised that I'm not in this camp and would love to hear why I am wrong or to be concerned. This isn't a wrong or a right different discussion. There's some really good research that Mike Israetel is the one that exposed me to this research. So I would reference and kind of point over to some of the work that he's done. But there are research studies that have shown that by adding the belt with weight distribution above the iliac crest and along the top of the top of the pelvis, you reduce axial vertical compression spine, axial loading by up to 95%. So it's actually a much safer way to squat, even compared to a traditional deadlift, a goblet squat, a barbell back squat for sure, anything else as far as vertically compacting pressure, axial pressure on your spine. And the way that works is the belt is looped around the top of the iliac crest, right, the top of the pelvis, and then goes down in between the thighs, keeping the center load and the center keeping the weight as close to or under your center of mass as possible. So we're reducing the upper body's half of pressure almost entirely, not completely. And I believe the study said anywhere from 80 to 95% in reduction in axial loading. Don't quote me on that. It was a very high number, but definitely very, very high. And a lot of the pressures are still going to occur from, number one, you are still having to bear the load that you are lifting somehow. So if I'm not having to stack it through my vertebrae, it is still going to displace somewhere. With this image, you can see how the belt wraps around. So that pressure is going to have to pull down and forward. So instead of the vertebrae getting vertical loading axial pressure this way, they would start to feel pressure and displacement in a horizontal plane or a diagonal plane. So if you have L4, L5, L5, S1 issues, which I do, that you can start to feel if you're not strong enough to hold the tension tight in your abdomen and your pelvic floor and such, you can start to feel some issues or some stress from this. But that's also why we don't use a ton of weight, because I can't handle any type of vertical axis pressure down more than maybe 100 pounds, but I could hang 300 pounds off my hips and I'm good. Anything heavier than that, that's when my body starts to aggravate, and it shows me I'm not strong enough to keep my vertebrae and my posture in the right positions, okay? By adding the belt, you're able to be a little more vertical in your torso, which will give us more quad activation, okay? The more vertical we are, the less axial loading, the more axial reduction pressure we're gonna be able to put through the spine. Now you'll still have valsalvic pressure, taking that pressure internally, you're going to still feel that valsalvic pressure back on your spine, and that's why it's not reduced entirely. But this is actually a much safer way in terms of vertical compression, right, and axial loading. This is a very good alternative, okay? Now, hanging the weight under the knees the way that I do there, and let me take you through and show you a couple of these guys as we go through it. This is with the flywheel, and you can see my torso is a little more vertical on this. My knees are definitely getting a little bit more play, right, in the action when we do this. That was a regular like flywheel, high tempo, we're going, right? High tempo, high revolutions, we're going, versus true time under tension. 3, 4, 5 seconds of controlled descent time. Now, I've had other videos where I'll have 3, 4, 5 vests on as well. I love the idea, like you're suggesting, is of spreading the weight around and having that distributed around. But I also wear my belt and have weight dangling from my hips to accommodate, right? I can take up to a certain amount of weight on my hips and then an additional amount of weight even in my arms or around my torso as we go. So I want to have you look at this. This is one of my favorite eccentric lifts. And we do this with our clients that they're not quite strong enough yet to get out of either this deep range of motion with this amount of weight or both. They can't go this deep, or they can't use that weight, or they can't do both, okay? Now, our client Linda here is about to have a knee replacement sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. So what we're doing is focusing on getting her knee strength and her quads and her hamstrings and her gastroc and everything else around it super strong. But we're also working on her ability to kind of overload her quads right now and get them as strong as we can, because we haven't been able to train them for a while. Anytime we would overtrain them, her knees would ache, they would swell, and we'd have days where she couldn't do a whole lot. With the end in sight, knowing that we're gonna have a new knee for her in 3 to 6 months, hopefully shorter, we can kind of push the limits on that a little bit and really encourage, right, this knee to get stronger. Even if we have some negative returns, and I'm not trying to destroy her, but I'm just saying if there are days where she gets a little flare up or there's some aggravation, we're pushing the limits a little bit more than normal, because we know, all right, the worst that can happen here is she gets this knee replacement and she's good. The stronger this is, the faster she's gonna rehabilitate. So one of my favorite lifts with that is give load that's a heavy load. This is a 18 or a 26 pound kettlebell that she's holding on to. And she's gonna descend slowly, right? 4, 3, 2, 1, unload. I take the weight and she gets out of that deep below parallel squat. And then she's quad dominant, eccentric, time under tension, right? Slow down. But what you can't see in this particular video is her heels are elevated on a 4-inch ramp. So what we're doing is shortening her gastroc, we're shortening her hamstrings, and we're placing all the stress through her quads. Now, on other lifts, we're increasing the stretch with kickstand RDLs or with snatch grip RDLs to really try to encourage high hamstring stretch and increased range there. We're working excessive range of motion on her calf pumps and calf raises to to develop extreme ranges of motion and strength there. So we're trying to overload or overwhelm certain musculatures here to help build up for her knee. Well, the knee and the back and the hip are all very interchangeable modifications, if you will. If you have injuries there, they're all very similarly modified to help people still continue to lift. For the most part, the majority of them cannot take a lot of axial loading and vertical pressure down on their body. Okay, so that's one component to adding either the vest, like you suggested, awesome, or by placing the weight around the hips and reducing that. Now, in terms of where this weight, okay, take a look at this position right here. So for every inch that weight is moved forward from her center of mass, let's consider the center of mass her belly button or an inch or two below her belly button, okay? Typically, most people center of mass, their belly button and their pelvic bone, right? Somewhere in between those two is their center of mass. So from that center of mass, going forward every inch or so, right? And these are generalizations, but there was research done to this, and I would have to search back. This was in college that we learned this. It's about 7 pounds of additional lower back pressure for every inch that weight gets moved forward. So even right here, from her belly button to where the weight is out here, she's got 12 inches, maybe 14 inches, okay? So let's call it 10 for easy math, right? 10 inches at 7 pounds, that's an extra 70 pounds of pressure on her lower back because she's holding the weight up in front of her. Weight up in front has to be countered by the lower back, low and behind. If she were to put the weight down in front of her between her knees, the stress would go up between her shoulder blades. So you kind of work these counters. If I'm gonna hold it low, my shoulders will take the pressure. If I'm gonna hold it high, my lower back's gonna take the pressure. So even though we're holding in a goblet and we're holding it in close, the further I move that weight away from my center of mass, the more lower back stress I'm gonna get from it. That's why if she moves it out further or reaches out in front of her, the lower back is gonna take a ton of that stress. And that's also why holding 18 pounds here, okay, can be extremely difficult. But she could hold 60 pounds down between her knees and feel like it's the same effort, right? It's all relative to where you position this, how close to the center of mass, and how mechanically advantaged your body is to move and manipulate this weight. So when we go back to the beginning of this here, let me go back to these guys. When we're getting into these positions where I'm a little bit more vertical and I'm able to place that stress below where the majority of my lower back injuries are, we can wrap this guy right around the top of these big bony hips, right? Bony by, I mean, I've got meat on my hips, but the iliac crest is very bony. There's a lot of surface area. And then that weight wraps down in between the adductors, and the weight basically sits right under my center of mass. So I'm reducing that leverage of 7 pounds. That's zero, right? It's right under me. And so as I manipulate that load up and down, the only thing I have to worry about is that shearing pressure, if you will, of where the belt kind of comes across my hips. There's definitely some stress there, and then valsalvic pressure. And then if you have any type of disc issues, you've had a discectomy, you've had a bulge, a herniation, anything like that, which I've had all of those, then there's a reverse breathing mechanic that can help you reduce your valsalvic pressure and make you rely on your abdominal wall itself without the air on the inside, right? You basically let all your air out as you're descending. But if you're not good and not in tune with your core and know enough on how to like squeeze and brace your body, our bodies are very used to taking that air in and using the valsalvic pressure to help stabilize us as we go through this kind of naturally. So if you blow all that air out, we kind of naturally lose that stress and that weight belt support. So you have to like, let all that air and squeeze in. But in many times doing that, we start to tuck our butt around our back, or we incave as we let that air out. Those can become some of the issues that come about with this. So great question, in that I want people to understand like why this is a safer option, but it doesn't come without risks or other considerations or other injuries that might hurt. And yeah, there are definitely velocity issues. We've had people that will get on a flywheel or try to belt squat too fast, and they get out of control with the weight and it yanks and it pulls on them. And they go, oh, that didn't feel good on my back. The first time I got on a flywheel, it bothered my back. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't learn how to control and descend the load and maintain it. I relaxed at certain points when I shouldn't have relaxed. So it comes with, some risk, but so do all the lifts, right? But I love the idea of like wrapping the weight around your body. And something that we consider with that often is a term called unconscious loading, okay? Unconscious loading addresses the idea of when I take a vest and I put it on for the first time, my mind goes, whoa, that's 20 pounds. That's heavy, right? But then I get into the workout and I start doing my sit to stands and I start doing my step ups and I do my inverted rows and I go about my workout, and pretty soon I'm more focused on my breathing or my technique or how many reps I have to do, or I'm listening to the music, or I'm talking to my coach, or any of the other things that might come up, where now I am unconsciously focused on the weight that is now wrapped around me. and it kind of just falls to the background, right? It becomes white noise a little bit, and I'm just doing what I do. I do my lift, and then when we get done, we go, okay, now you can take the vest off, and almost every time our clients go, oh, I forgot I had that on, okay? That is unconscious loading. And so your mind might go, well, if you're not thinking about it, it's not heavy enough. Remember the point of wearing a vest, the point of wearing a ruck. I see a lot of people that do vest and ruck workouts and ruck backpacks and rucking, and they're like, oh, I'm going heavier and heavier. And that's not the point. The point is not to move as much load as you can. If that was the point, you should go deadlift and back squat and bench press and the lifts that are designed for you to move heavy load. A vest is not designed and a ruck is not designed to have 80, 90, 100 pounds. I mean, they are, but the strategy, in my opinion, is not to do that. It's to add a little bit of extra weight, 10, 20, maybe 30 pounds, or like 10% of your body weight at the max, and then manipulate that over and over and over and over and over again. So if you take 10 pounds and strap it, like you suggested, 5 to the front, 5 to the back, and wrap it around you, and then you just kind of unconsciously, it just kind of drifts to the background as you're doing your whole workout, what you've done with those 100 sit to stands and 100 step ups and 100 push ups and 100 inverted rows was moved over 400 reps, that extra 10 pounds, 4,000 additional pounds that you would not have normally done. And what do you say afterwards? Oh, I forgot I had it on. That's awesome. Do you know how much more work you just put through your body? But you weren't really thinking about it because it wasn't in your hands, right? It wasn't on your back. It wasn't held to your chest. It wasn't down between your knees in front of your shins to deadlift or pull off the floor. It was just wrapped to you, and you got caught up in the good moment of exercise and you kind of forgot about it. Now, if you're using a load that you can't forget about, if you're like, I never forget about mine, maybe your weight's too heavy, okay? I had a client that came up for his first ruck, and he brought 60 pounds of weight with him. And I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I saw one of your posts that you did 60 pounds. I was like, yeah, one time. I've been rucking for 3 years at that point. I was like, I've done it one time. And it was for like a half a mile. And then I dropped that weight. It was in honor of this or that. Like, that's not a common thing. I typically take 10% of my body weight, which is about 25 to 30 pounds, okay? I'm not 300 pounds, but I have a 30-pound plate. It's always in my ruck, okay? That's my constant and consistent training load. On occasion, I'll go a little heavier. On occasion, we'll go a little lighter, right? But that's my consistent load. I mean, within the first mile, he was dropping plates and leaving them on the side of the road. We had to pick him up on the way back. It was just way too heavy. That's not the point of this. And that's also not the point, in my opinion, of introducing the belt squat to our clients that have lower back limitations or injuries. It's to reduce the actual loading and maybe give them the same amount of weight they would typically deadlift, a 8 kilo, a 12 kilo, a 16 kilo kettlebell. But instead of taking the vertical loaded pressure of holding it in your hands, we can simply drift it around your hips and allow your lower body to get the exact same training it would get, right? But reduce the axial pressure on your spine. Now, the argument can be made from there is, well, you're not getting all the torso strength and you're not getting the upper body and the posterior chain. Correct. As with anything, any modification, you're going to have perks and you're going to have, some faults to it. And in this case, yeah, I would rather clients be able to deadlift weight off the floor, but if they can't, how can I get the best result with whatever modification I can provide them and still be able to train? I could go and do rows. I can go and do grip strength. I might have to do a couple of other things to achieve the overall success I would have got if they could just do a deadlift and we check all the boxes in one. Well, I might have to belt squat and do inverted rows and then I can check the boxes, right? And so there's some additional pieces to implement in this, but I wouldn't shy away from it and say, oh no, I think this is a bad lift, or no. There aren't, in my opinion, there are no bad lifts. And I've said this in the past, and people are like, wall ball and burpees and blah, and everybody throws out something. And to any of those exercises, there is a reason to do them, right? And then people go, well, they're dangerous, so they'll hurt people. Well, any exercise can be dangerous and hurt you if you're not doing it right. So a burpee isn't a bad exercise, but do I want to take a bunch of immobile, unflexible, weak, deconditioned people and try to get them to lay down and get up off the ground a whole bunch of times without hurting their back? No. right? I don't want to do that. Do I want to have them squat and throw a medicine ball into the air and have it impact and slam back on them when they can't lift their head up to even see it, let alone take the impact on their arthritic and neuropathy-filled hands and their carpal tunnel-filled wrists and their arthritic condylitis elbow issues? Like, no, those are bad decisions, bad exercise selections, but the exercise isn't bad. Military, UFC fighters, wrestlers, ninjas all have to jump on the ground and they have to get back up again, right? That's part of their demand of their job, or if they're gonna live or die. But do I need to do that with my lower back and fake hips? Fuck no, I don't need to do that. Like, I don't wanna do that. But there's nothing wrong with that exercise. There's nothing wrong with belt squatting. But if you're like, well, I've got, this and that and this and that, then maybe that's not the best choice for you, but there's nothing wrong with this style of training, this particular lift, as long as it's being appropriately selected for the person. And in this case, in my case, and the majority of our clients that we work with, this is a way for us to reduce axial loading and give them a way to train their lower half without causing further lower back limitations, pains, or injuries. I hope this helped. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a great question. As you can tell, something that I'm really passionate about and that I love and that I've researched a ton of. So much that I invested in one of the best pieces of equipment I've ever invested in, and they are not cheap, but I knew it would be so valuable for me personally. This is one of the few pieces of equipment that I purchased for myself and then found, oh, this is actually really good for everybody, right? All my clients can benefit from this. And then I implemented it in with them, where almost every other piece of equipment I have, I purchased it for the good of the cause of our people and then said, oh yeah, this is actually a good one for me too. So I researched the hell out of this thing and said, man, I've got to find a way to train my lower half. I'm losing size, I'm losing musculature, I'm losing my abilities here because I just can't load my spine at all. I mean, hardly at all compared to what I used to be able to do. Now I can get close to some of those loads and not have any negative returns or very minimal negative returns that I can manage and manipulate in my body to not have issues in the long run. Comments, questions, happy to have discussions. Fire away down below. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have anything else you want me to discuss in the future, I love it when people email and they would send in topics. So to our individual that sent in your question and the requests that you put in for other ones, I love it. Keep going. Thank you so much for supporting us and for giving ideas, because I want to supply you all information that you're seeking. And this gives me a great opportunity to do some breakdowns with you and have these discussions. Thank you all so much. And if you don't mind, hit the subscribe button, like button, share with others. That would be great. Help us grow our community. Much appreciation. And until next time, continue to fight your good fight against sarcopenia. Peace.